I love risk assessments. Okay. Start to finish risk assessments, the HIRA, the hazard identification risk assessment. Let's look through the main things we need to remember. First, likelihood times consequence equals risk. This is going to come into play because at the end of this whole thing, we're going to make what's known as a risk matrix. A risk matrix is basically a giant chart. So the way the risk matrix works is you have a chart array graph. You will have likelihood in one of the axes and consequence in the other. So for example, let us grab different magical colors. Let's grab blue. We're going to have likelihood in one column or in one axis, and then you'll have consequence in the other. Before we figure that out, though, we have to determine what our likelihoods or our consequences are. This is from the perspective of the organization or whatever within the scope that you've set. So I'm going to run through a make-believe one, but you can fill these in as necessary with what you think works for you. So first, we're going to determine likelihood. You're going to make a chart. For making the chart's going to have likelihood on it. So likelihood. We're going to have scores for these, and then we're going to have what those mean. So we're going to have likelihood, and then we're going to have kind of the breakpoint. So we're going to have likelihood, and we're going to have breakpoint. So this is going to be a chart. And we're going to have likelihood numbers. I like going from 0 to 5, but you could use pretty much any numbers you want. You could go 0 to 4, you could use 1 to 5, whatever. I like having a 0. You'll find why later. So let's say we have likelihood 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, for your likelihood, you want to figure out how often is a 0 for you. Now, I'm going to say, for the way that I like to do this, the lower the number, the less likely the thing is, which will be on the axis. And the higher the number, the more likely the thing is. So 0 is from a certain point to absolutely never. So this is your least likely category. It could be any number you choose. If you're a business that is only going to exist for like 10 years, then you're probably looking at a once a 10-year event. If it happens once every 30 years, it might as well be once every 10 years because you only exist for 10 years. For the average person's lifespan, if you have something that only happens once every 100 years, that's once in your life, you could say it's a once every 100-year event. You'd be like 100 years to infinity. So for example, you could have just put numbers in here. So I could put in, 100, once every 100 years, 50 years, 10 years, 5 years, year, whatever. I could do that. The problem is, if I have a breakpoint that says once every 5 years and once every 10 years, and then something happens once every 7 years, let's say I say the 2 is once every 10 years and the 3 is once every 5, is it a 2 or a 3 if it happens once every 7 years? 7 years. So if I have once every 5 is a 3 and once every 10 is a 2, is a 7 a 2 or a 5? This is the problem, because you have exact points. You don't know what to do with the middle ranges. This is why when I do these likelihoods, I like to create breakpoints. Now, this is how this is going to work. 0 is going to be basically never. 2, we'll say once every 50 years. Now, this would assume, a business that's planning on being around for a very long period of time. This would not necessarily work for short-term things, but we'll say that if it happens once every 50 years, it effectively happens basically never for as far as this business is concerned. Fine. Now, look at the 5 breakpoint. So look at the other extreme. This is going to be always or constant into how often. Now, depending on the business, if you're a business that or an organization that only operates on quarterly things, this could be once a quarter. That's possible. For something that is more day-to-day, that deals with like customers face-to-face really often, you might be looking at once a week, once a day, something like that. I think for most organizations, I'm going to put this at around a month, just for now. But for you, if you're on a shorter time span, this might be a week or once a day. Just depends on what we're looking at. But we'll say this actually, I'm going to put it at I'll put it at a month. Yeah, I'll put it at a month. So we have something that happens constant to once a month to 1 month. Okay. Now, in between here, we've got to figure out what 1, 2, 3, and 4 is. Now, for 1, we know the lower breakpoint of it is going to be once every 50 years. We know that because of this. We've got to figure out where we want our next breakpoint to be. I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, for this business or this organization, we're going to say every 5 years. So if something happens once every 10 years, it's a 1. If something happens once every 20 years, it's a 1. If something happens once every 4 years, it ain't a 1, right? You have your range, okay? If something happens once every 50 years, flip a coin, okay? It's the same breakpoint. It's fine. But you have less things now where it's a debate. You only have stuff that's on the exact number breakpoint where you're really debating this, and that's okay. It's kind of in the middle, but you have your range here, okay? Then you fill in the rest. So 4 would be 1 month to once a quarter, probably. Yeah, so for 1 month to 3 months. A lot of businesses are quarterly, so this makes sense for a lot of people. And then for 5 years, we would have from 5 years to 1 year. And then 3, because you have your last breakpoints here, you just fill it in. You would have 1 year to 3 months. Okay, so if a hurricane, it's not a hurricane, let's say that you have a power outage, hit your business once a quarter, right? So once every 3 months, a power outage hits you because whatever, the power grid, fine. At least once a quarter, if not more. This would be a 4. This would be something that would be a likelihood 4. That's for later. This is just you figuring out what the frequency is for you so that you know it. Okay, we've done that. Now we got to do consequence. Now consequence is a bit of a monster. Consequence. No. Consequence. When you're doing consequences, you've got to figure out which ones you're actually focusing on. Now, generally speaking, there are 3 categories for consequences that people look at. These are life/safety, assets, and reputation. Generally speaking, your consequences are going to fall into these 3 sorts of categories. There could be others, but these are the main ones you're probably going to be dealing with. When you make consequences for a risk assessment, you can choose to use all of these. You can choose to use one of these. You can choose to use 2, whatever. But which ones you choose to put in are going to change how this whole thing works. So this is going to matter a lot. For example, if you do life or safety, then you're going to have to quantify what a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 5 are for a life or safety impact. Same thing for assets, same thing for reputation. And then you're going to have to decide, let's say I have a power outage and it's a 1 consequence for life and safety and a 5 consequence for assets. Is it a 1 or a 5? Is it a 3? Because you have multiple consequence numbers now. This creates layers. So figure out which one of these you want to focus on. For many businesses, assets are going to be the easiest thing for them to quantify because they're going to do it based in a financial, some number of this much money was lost due to money plus assets combined, whatever. So for an assets version, so let's have consequence and then we can have assets, and we could extend this further later, but we have assets here. We could say that a 0, for example, might be, and I'm gonna do these back and forth here because I think it's gonna be easier. So I'll use different colors as we go through so you can see this easier on the board. So we might say that a 0 could be $0 to, let's say, $1,000. So if the business takes an $1,000 hit from something, it's a fairly large business, it just whatever, it's $1,000. Okay, and we'll say for the sake of argument that for this given business, and a 5 is going to be catastrophic, the highest number in your consequence needs to be absolute obliteration. So whatever this number is you are dead, there is no recovering, it is over, you are bankrupt, it is absolute catastrophic obliteration is what this number needs to represent. It is really important that you have the 5 and the 0 really well understood, because this is going to tell you that for within the given scope that you have, this, when something hits this category, you are completely screwed. And it is good to know where your breaking point is for when you're completely screwed. So there is a number here that this represents. You have your 0, which represents you basically don't care. And then you have your 5 that represents there's nothing I can do about it, I am done. So at 5, your strategies are irrelevant. The contingencies you put in place don't matter. You're done. So in a family, for example, if you were to do a risk management or a risk plan like this, for life and safety of a family, a 5 would be, for example, entire family dies. There is no family, they're all dead. That would be a catastrophic impact. There's no responding to that. There's no doing anything with that. There's no one left to respond to the thing. There is some breakpoint. Going through the exercise of finding out what this is, that exercise alone can be a huge benefit to a company because you know what your breaking point is. So you want to find out what this number is. I will say that for the sake of argument for this company, if they take a $50 million hit, they're done. So if this company has some sort of thing that hits their business for 50 million, they're dead. They're bankrupt. They run for the hills, hide the money. We're going to a different country. It's over. Okay, that's what that number is. Okay, now in between, they would have to come up with what these breakpoints are, and you generally don't do this ad hoc. Well, that's not true. The first time you do it ad hoc, then you find out it's wrong, and then you redo it 15 times. So you're going to have to go through this and go, I don't know if I like that, and then change it around. We'll get to that in a second. But you fill these in. These two should be easier to kind of find out. And then you'd go through, so let's say the 1, for the sake of argument now, would be 1,000 to relatively negligible impact, but you'd still feel it with that sort of budget. Well, you start having to do approvals, and you start having to look at management to do things once you're past 5 to 10,000 with a lot of companies. So we'll say this is probably 10. This is probably 10,000. You know, we have an impact here that isn't catastrophic, but it's still very significant, and our business is going to feel it. That could be, I mean, $1 million's pretty safe here, so we'll go $1 million to, and I'm just going to 50 million. 3 here. We'll continue on with this and fill stuff in, so we can go 10,000 to 100. And I just said that I was going to flip these colors back and forth, and then I lied to myself. Here we'd have 100 to 1 million. Okay. So we have some sort of breakpoints financially. Now, we could extend this, like with the life safety assets and reputation. For example, we could extend this, and we could do life safety. So we send this to life safety, and we can start filling in things like a 5 could be company of this size, catastrophic life loss. Probably anything that would get the government to shut you down due to unsafe environment to everybody's dead. A company of this size can survive a lot of physical harm to people because companies of this size are very flexible. You can hire new people, especially if you're not at fault, like if it's a hurricane that does it or something, then you can recover through a lot. You might even have to separate this between when the company's at fault and when the company's not at fault, because that can change here. So you have to figure out what you're going to do here, but for the sake of argument, we'll say 10 plus fatality, although it's probably a larger number than that. We'll say that zero would effectively be Band-Aid. So, barely anything. And somewhere in this would be like lost time injuries. So a 1 would be anything where an incident report has to get filed. A 2 might be something where, yeah, sure. So this might be a lost time injury. So a lost time injury would be a situation where an employee gets injured and then they have to get sent home for the day or they miss some work because of whatever happens. This would trigger a bunch of labor regulations and the government wanting to find out, hey, what happened here? And there's other things that happen, not just the person getting injured. So the business might, or the organization might get hit by that more. And then you're starting to get into, bigger stuff here. So we'd have, LTD. So we'd have long-term disability. And we'd probably have here fatality. Okay, so you have here now, for example, your consequences sorted into assets and life safety, and you have your 0 through 5. You've quantified that if you have this much money loss, it's going to result in it being a 0 to the business's perspective, etc. Here's something else you've now done though. You have now financially quantified how much a life is worth and how much an injury costs you. And when you have two different teams, especially developing these numbers, you have indirectly done this. So technically, the business has now concluded that a fatality is a $1 million to $50 million impact, that these are the same thing. These are the same thing to the business. I'm going to tell you right now, to most businesses, that is not true. That fatality is going way up here. It is way less significant than that impact. That number is a much bigger, more important number to most businesses than one person dying. This is not realistic. But fair enough, this is the example we're using for now. I can also tell you that a Band-Aid does not cost $1,000. This is not an issue. That's not being equated this way. Having said that, depending on the employee, a long-term disability effect on an employee that's an extremely high earner might actually be a greater impact than this number, because you're effectively losing their salary and you have to train a new one, and the new one might not be as effective. You may be hemorrhaging resources because of this. If it's a long-term disability situation where the person is paid a huge amount of money for their given salary and they're out of commission for years and you're paying for it, this could be actually pretty close to even more, in addition to the losses you may incur because they may have just been really, really good at what they're doing, and because you have to train someone new and they're not working there at the time, you make less money because of it. This might actually be a bigger impact than this is financially, in addition to the fact that they're injured. So it kind of depends. So you're going to have to play with these numbers a bit, really test them, think about, okay, something happens, I've said it's a this and it's a this, do I agree? And some organizations, having said that, look, if you take a company that works with children, so childcare, kids sports teams, hockey practice, dance studios, stuff like that, this column of life safety is going to be really high on the list. Because if you have a kid die in your care when you are, an after-school program, you're done. Like, your business is done. It is absolutely catastrophic. And not just because of this, but because if you add in reputational risk, the effect of that is just, it is obliterating your business. So some organizations, some industries will view this way more severely on the list. So it just depends. Anyways, look at this. Think about what you want to do. You've quantified your likelihood. You've quantified your consequences. You're going to have to play with them around with them a bit and kind of figure that out. Okay? That's the initial start. You found out your breakpoints. Most people that do risk assessments do not do this step. They have someone else give them this step, and because of that, they have not gone through the exercise of figuring out what an impact or likelihood is to them, and they're filling in a chart basically based off of somebody else's math that doesn't represent their reality. This is the most important part of your risk assessment. If you don't do this, you are wasting your time. Okay, if I'm telling you right now, if you are part of an organization that has done a HIRA, a hazard identification risk assessment, if you're part of an organization that's done that and they haven't done this step, and if they haven't like re-reviewed it, it's garbage. It's a waste of time. You need to have this to know if you're completely full of it or not. So, okay. That's the beginning. That's the idea. We can see how this plays out later. I'm going to have to create room for our magical chart. What I can do actually is this.